Hi everyone, this is George and welcome to George's Library, and today we're going to talk about Boy and Going Solo by Roald Dahl. These are actually two novels in one, but because my edition has both the stories in just one book, I decided to read the both of them and introduce both of them to you at the same time. Before I continue, there is something very important that I have to mention. This was introduced to the public as an autobiography of Roald Dahl. Now, there are some aspects about this that are to be discussed because we are not very sure if this is an autobiography or not. Boy is more about Roald Dahl's childhood, and the novel starts practically from the day he was born until the day he gets his first job in Africa. And Going Solo continues from there. You see Dahl embarking on his first trip. He has a job for Shell in East Africa, and he also participates in World War II. So the entire second novel is about his time in Africa and also his participation in the war. Now, myself, I kind of believe the stories that he mentions in this book. I don't find them. I find them incredible, but not impossible. I don't see the stories that he wrote as something concluding to the fact that his autobiography is actually fiction. But I will tell you what Roald Dahl mentioned at the beginning of the book, and then I will just let you make your own conclusions to this. An autobiography is a book a person writes about his own life, and it is usually full of all sorts of boring details. This is not an autobiography. Now, this part might make you say, this is perfectly clear, George, that Roald Dahl is stating that this is not actually an autobiography. Yes, that's true, I agree with you, but let's read further on. I would never write a history of myself. On the other hand, throughout my young days at school and just afterwards, a number of things happened to me that I have never forgotten. None of these things is important, but each of them made such a tremendous impression on me that I have never been able to get them out of my mind. Each of them, even after a lapse of 50 and sometimes 60 years, has remained seared on my memory. I didn't have to search for any of them. All I had to do was skim them off the top of my consciousness and write them down. Some are funny, some are painful, some are unpleasant. I suppose that is why I have always remembered them so vividly. All are true. What I can say is that the novels are filled with such moments. Regardless if they are true or not, I do feel that whatever he managed to build was quite real. I will start with talking about Boy, and then we can carry on to Going Solo. Like I said, Boy starts with the presentation of his parents, and he talks about how his father decided to move from Norway to England with his brother, and then both him and his brother went separate ways, and both of them were successful in their businesses. There is a very shocking introduction of his father at the beginning of the book, mentioning how he lost an arm in an accident, and the doctor was drunk when he did the surgery, and instead of fixing his arm, he made it worse, and so they eventually had to cut it off. Terrible. The way Dahl writes is similar to his other novels. Roald Dahl writes children fantasy books. I have only read The Witches. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I'm sure, is very familiar to a lot of you. Matilda. I grew up watching Matilda. I have never knew it's a Roald Dahl story, but I sure love the film. The Big Friendly Giant, I think that came out like 2 years ago, a Spielberg film. If you are familiar with these movies, then you will have an idea of the type of stories Roald Dahl writes. Now imagine the person who wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and one day just sat down and decided, I'm gonna write my autobiography. Boy has everything that his novel have. It's funny, it's weird, it's very emotional, and I never knew how important drawings are, how much of an effect drawing have in a story. It's incredible, and particularly his story. Drawings in his novels add another effect to the entire story. I have found myself laughing out loud while reading this so many times, and not just because of the chapters or the action happening in there, but also because of the use of words. The way he writes is so funny, and if you add to that the drawings and the action itself, like the scene itself, you're just, it instantly puts you in a good mood. Dahl manages to encapsulate the feeling of that age very well. While reading, you constantly connect the events of the story to parts of your childhood. You relate to the emotion rather than to the action. You relate to the feeling of being there, of having that age. You think of how you felt, and you find yourself feeling the same way as the boy in the novel did. What he manages to do very well is to actually encapsulate those moments through these little sequences that he says are real. You remember going to school for the first time. You remember the bullies. You remember the system. You can see things in Boy that are relatable to his future novels. The consequence of him getting in trouble with the mouse chapter led him to the headmaster's office, and the headmaster would punish them by beating them up with a cane. It's terrible, but he used this in so many chapters, and he presented this happening to him and other boys from the school so many times that I think it's very important for me to speak about it as well. Like, the punishments in the schools, not just one school, but all of the schools he's been to, were terrible for that time. All the headmasters apparently have a cane to beat students up with, and he made a drawing of it. It's so funny. The fact that he used the drawing of the cane not once, but 3 times in 3 different chapters in 3 different ways was hilarious. Like I said, the drawings amazed me. The summer holidays, those magic words, the mere mention of them used to send shivers of joy rippling over my skin. Guys, I'm sure every one of you relates to this. It made me have shivers of joy on my skin just reading these words. I'm sure all of you remember summer holidays. The effect of these words, like summer holiday, when school was over, you would go back home, you would have the freedom. There are so many things that relate to this. You had 3 months where you escaped from the system, you escaped from school, from teachers, from colleagues, and all that, and you could just be yourself and be with yourself and with your friends, and you would try to find something worth doing. And his description of Norway is very beautiful. The lakes, the boats, and the little cabin or cottages that they used to live in during the summer when he was out with his mom and his sisters. All the activities they did and the stories related to them. It was very beautiful. And he was clearly very fond of those summers and very fond of the time he spent with his family out in Norway. And very fond of Norway as well. The only reason why he went to school in England is that his father, before his father died, told his mom that he believes English schools are the best schools in the world. So his mom wanted to fulfill his father's wish and send him to an English school. The experience of living in a boarding school is very profound. One of the activities they had every Sunday in boarding school was to first go to church, second, write a letter home. And he mentions at some point that he has never kept the habit of going to church, but he has kept the habit of writing a letter to his mom every week. And he said that since that day, he wrote a letter to his mom every week, and that in the day she died, she knew she's going to die, and he was having some issues in another hospital somewhere. And she called him, and they had their last talk, and she gave him all the letters that he sent her throughout throughout her life. I found that very beautiful. This is the type of little stories or little scenes that Dahl creates in these books, and you can't just, you cannot get emotional, or you cannot relate to some of these things or feel these things a little bit. And I believe that if a book make you feel, then it's worth reading. I don't want to make this video too long, so I'm gonna jump to the next novel, which is Going Solo. Boy ends with Dahl getting a job in East Africa for the Shell company, and Going Solo starts exactly where Boy ends. You see him embarking on the ship to East Africa, and the first part of the book is mostly about his journey. It is very similar to a travel log because you see him describing the environment, you see him describing the trip and the people around, and you can see also a different change of rhythm and a different change of tone in his writing. He becomes more serious, he's less playful with his words, he's still very funny, but in the same time you can understand that he's imposing a little bit more on us this time. The chapters are also a bit longer than they were in Boy. His trip to East Africa has that adventure vibe to it, which he probably felt himself when he first embarked there. He was ready to go to a country that he really wanted to see. He wanted to travel and he wanted to experience all that, and his dreams were coming true. And he described the people on board in very funny ways, and he said that the British people that lived in Africa for so many years have lost their minds a little bit. There is one little story where he wakes up in the morning, he opens the window, he takes some fresh air, and then suddenly a naked guy was running right in front of his window like this. Apparently the British gain some new habits when living abroad. He waits a little bit, wants to see who that guy was. You see him coming again. This time with his wife. Both naked, by the way. His reaction was, "Good morning." While in Africa, he lives in a city called Dar es Salaam, and this is where he delivers things for Shell, from what I understood. That was his job, to just go through different people in different houses and sell whatever Shell was selling at that time. He found it a great life, and a lot of those chapters are simply describing his life in Dar es Salaam, the jungle with the snakes, the giraffes, and everything that is related and beautiful about Africa. He talks about the people, he talks about his daily activities, and he has a couple of chapters where he mentions a few stories related to snakes. He had an encounter with a black mamba and another encounter with a green mamba. Practically, the black mamba and the green mamba are deadly, and they're not afraid of men, so they are not afraid to attack you if they see you. What he also added, but he had this in Boy as well, but here is more prominent, or at least he pointed them out more clearly, are the letters that he sent to his mom. His letters are also printed on the pages separately to the main story, to the main text, and also they add a new layer to the entire story because you see his actual thoughts from those times. After the war starts, it reminded me of different scenes from Hemingway's books. There is one scene where they were waiting for the war to be declared, and there were a lot of Germans living in Dar es Salaam on that side of Africa. What he was in charge of is to stop the Germans from running away. He was in charge with a group of people, and they went somewhere at the border, and after the signal, they would simply block the border and stop and imprison all the Germans that would cross. And this is where I had the similarities with Hemingway. The way they would prepare things and the descriptions of the woods and the descriptions of the men and how they would eat all had that Hemingway sense to it. Of course, there are a lot of beautiful descriptions of the African landscape. The thing that came as new to me was to see the perspective of the air fighter. This is the first time that I've ever seen World War II from an airplane, practically. You get to see how the missions were delivered to him, what he had to do as an air fighter, the type of planes, his training. The ending is very emotional. You empathize with him and with his family when he returns home. So I won't spoil that for you in case you want to read it. I'm just going to let you Go for it yourself, and let me know in the comments if you liked it or if you're interested in reading this book or books. I would give both of them a chance if I were you. Boy is really funny, so if you don't feel like going to World War II, then just pick Boy up and let yourself carried by it. It's not very long. I'm sure you can read it in one day if you have the time and if you really feel like getting lost in a book. Don't be fooled by the fact that these are mostly children's books. You know, fantasy, literature, it can always take you by surprise. Just give it a chance. If you like my videos, please subscribe to my channel. I am planning on making many more reviews. I'm gonna wish you all a great day and just keep reading.